Lead yourself first. Build self-control and inner stability. No one is coming to manage your life. The moment you lead yourself, everything changes. Introduction. You already know what you should be doing. You know you should wake up earlier, exercise, work on that project, stop scrolling, stop avoiding the hard thing. You know, but knowing isn't the problem. Doing is. And the gap between knowing and doing, that's where most people live. In the space between intention and action. Between wanting to change and actually changing. And in that gap you feel stuck. Out of control. Like you're constantly fighting yourself. Like part of you wants one thing and another part wants the opposite. And neither side wins for long. This book is not about willpower. It's not about forcing yourself to be someone you're not. It's not about grinding harder or hustling more or punishing yourself into discipline. It's about something quieter, something more sustainable. It's about learning to lead yourself, to build self-control that doesn't require constant effort, to create inner stability that doesn't collapse every time life gets hard. Leading yourself means you stop waiting. You stop waiting for motivation, for the right moment, for someone else to push you, for circumstances to align perfectly. You just decide, and then you move. Not perfectly, not all at once, but consistently, in small ways, every day. This book will show you how, not through vague advice or motivational speeches, but through specific practices, simple systems, gentle shifts in how you think about discipline and control. You'll learn why most people feel out of control, why discipline isn't about force, why you need to stop fighting yourself, how a morning reset can set your entire day, how one simple rule kills procrastination. You'll learn why emotional control comes before time control. How to use 10-minute focus sprints. How to build tiny promises you actually keep. How calm people stay consistent. How to remove friction instead of relying on willpower. You'll learn how to strengthen your ability to say no. And how to become someone you can rely on. This is not a quick fix. It's a foundation. A way of being with yourself that makes everything else easier. Because when you lead yourself, when you build real self-control and inner stability, you stop feeling like your life is happening to you. You start feeling like you're steering it. And that changes everything. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Why most people feel out of control. You wake up with good intentions. Today will be different. Today you'll follow through. Today you'll be disciplined. And then the day happens. Distractions, fatigue, a decision you didn't plan for, a moment of weakness, and before you know it, you've done the thing you said you wouldn't do. Or you haven't done the thing you promised yourself you would. And you feel it, that sinking feeling. Like you've let yourself down again. Like you can't trust yourself. Like you're out of control. This is not unique to you. Most people feel this way. Most people feel like they're constantly trying to manage themselves and constantly failing. And the reason is simple. You're trying to control outcomes instead of conditions. You're trying to force yourself to do things without creating the environment where those things become natural. You're relying on willpower when willpower is the weakest tool you have. Willpower is finite. It runs out. It's strongest in the morning and weakest at night. It's strong when you're rested and weak when you're tired. It's strong when you're happy and weak when you're stressed. So if your entire system depends on willpower, you're going to fail, not because you're weak, but because willpower isn't designed to hold everything together. Most people also feel out of control because they don't have clarity. They have vague goals. I want to be healthier. I want to be more productive. I want to get my life together. But vague goals create vague actions, and vague actions don't lead anywhere. You need clarity, specific clarity. Not be healthier, but walk for 20 minutes every morning. Not be more productive, but work on the project for 1 hour before checking email. Clarity removes the decision fatigue. It removes the negotiation. You already know what you're doing. You just do it. Another reason people feel out of control, they're trying to change too much at once. They decide they're going to wake up at 5, work out, meditate, eat perfectly, work for 8 focused hours, and never look at their phone. And it lasts 3 days, maybe a week, and then it all falls apart. Because you can't rebuild your entire life at once. You can only change one thing at a time, maybe 2, and you have to let those changes settle before you add more. People also feel out of control because they're constantly reacting. They're responding to notifications, to other people's demands, to whatever feels urgent in the moment. And when you're always reacting, you're not leading. You're following the loudest voice, the most immediate pull, and at the end of the day, you realize you didn't do anything you actually wanted to do. So the feeling of being out of control is not a character flaw. It's a systems problem. You don't have the right conditions. You don't have clarity. You're trying to change too much, and you're reacting instead of leading. But all of that can change, not overnight, but step by step. And it starts with understanding this: you can't control everything, but you can control the conditions. And when you control the conditions, the outcomes take care of themselves. Chapter 2. Discipline is not force, it's design. When most people think of discipline, they think of forcing themselves, grinding through resistance, powering through when they don't want to. And sometimes that works, for a little while. But force is exhausting, and it's not sustainable. You can't force yourself through your entire life. Real discipline is not about force, it's about design. It's about setting up your life so that the things you want to do become easier, and the things you don't want to do become harder. Think about it. If you want to drink more water, you don't rely on willpower to remember. You put a water bottle next to your bed, on your desk, in your bag. You design your environment so drinking water is the easiest option. If you want to stop scrolling your phone at night, you don't just tell yourself to stop. You put your phone in another room. You charge it outside your bedroom. You remove the option. That's design, not force. Discipline through design means you're not fighting yourself every day. You're not relying on willpower to make the right choice. You've already made the choice with how you've structured your day, your space, your habits. This is why routines are powerful, not because they're rigid, but because they remove decisions. When you have a routine, you don't have to decide whether to work out. You just work out because it's Tuesday at 7. And that's what happens on Tuesday at 7. The decision was made once, and now you just follow the design. Design also means understanding your patterns. When are you most focused? When are you most distracted? When do you have the most energy? When do you tend to collapse? If you know you're sharpest in the morning, you don't schedule creative work for late afternoon. You design your day so the hard work happens when you're at your best. If you know you're weak to distractions after 8 p.m., You don't rely on willpower to avoid them. You design your evening so distractions aren't available. Discipline through design also means making the first step as small as possible. If you want to start running, you don't commit to running 5 miles. You commit to putting on your shoes. That's the only requirement, and once your shoes are on, running becomes easier. If you want to write, you don't commit to writing 1,000 words. You commit to opening the document. That's it. And once it's open, writing becomes easier. The design removes the resistance, and once resistance is low, discipline doesn't feel hard. This is a complete shift from how most people think about discipline. They think it's about being tough, about forcing themselves through discomfort. But that's not sustainable. That leads to burnout, to resentment, to eventually giving up. Design is sustainable because you're not fighting yourself. You're working with yourself. You're making it easier to do the things that matter. So stop trying to force yourself. Start designing your life. Design your environment, your routines, your triggers, your first steps, and watch how discipline stops feeling like a battle. Chapter 3. Stop fighting yourself. There's a war happening inside most people. One part wants to do the thing. The other part doesn't. And they fight. All day, every day. I should work on this, but I'm tired. But it's important. But I don't feel like it. But I'll regret it later. But I just want to rest. And that fight is exhausting. It drains you, and often, neither side wins. You don't work, but you don't rest either. You just sit in the tension, feeling guilty and unproductive at the same time. The first step to self-control is not winning that fight. It's ending it. You end the fight by making a clear decision, not a vague intention, a decision. You decide I'm working for 30 minutes, or I'm resting for 30 minutes. And then you commit fully, no negotiation, no second guessing, just action. The fight happens because you're stuck in indecision. You haven't committed to either path, so you're hovering in the middle. And the middle is where all the suffering lies. But when you commit, the fight stops. Your mind stops debating, your body stops resisting. You just do the thing. Stopping the fight also means accepting that you're not always going to feel motivated. You're not always going to want to do the thing. And that's okay. You don't need to want it. You just need to do it. Most people wait for the feeling. They wait to feel motivated, to feel ready, to feel inspired. But feelings don't create action. Action creates feelings. You start. And then motivation follows. You start. And then clarity follows. Another way to stop fighting yourself is to remove the judgment. When you don't follow through, when you fall short, you don't need to punish yourself. You just notice. I didn't do the thing. That's it. No story, no spiral. Just a fact. And then you decide what comes next. The fight inside you gets louder when you judge yourself. When you make every mistake mean something about your character. When you turn every slip into evidence that you're failing. But when you remove the judgment, when you just see it as data, the fight quiets. You're not at war with yourself. You're just adjusting. You also stop fighting yourself when you honor your limits. When you recognize that you can't do everything, that you need rest, that you need space. Discipline is not about ignoring your needs. It's about meeting them intentionally. If you're exhausted, rest fully, without guilt. And then when you're rested, work fully, without distraction. But stop doing both halfway. Stop resting while feeling guilty. Stop working while wishing you were resting. Commit fully to whichever you choose. The internal fight is the biggest drain on your energy, bigger than the work itself, bigger than the effort. So stop fighting, decide, commit, act, and reclaim all the energy you've been wasting on the war inside. Chapter 4. The morning reset that sets your direction. The first hour of your day determines the rest of it, not because of some mystical law, but because of momentum. If you start the day creative, hacking your phone, scrolling, responding to other people's demands, you stay reactive all day. You're following, not leading. But if you start the day intentional, with a clear action, a moment of grounding, a decision about what matters, you carry that intention forward. The morning reset doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's not a 2-hour routine you'll never stick to. It's just a few minutes, a moment to orient yourself, to decide who you're being today. Here's a simple version. When you wake up, before you check your phone, before you do anything else, sit for 2 minutes. Just sit, in silence, or with your eyes closed, or looking out the window, and ask yourself one question: what matters most today? Not what's urgent, not what's demanding your attention. What actually matters? Then choose one thing, one action, one focus, and commit to doing that thing before anything else. Maybe it's 30 minutes of focused work. Maybe it's a walk. Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's just being present with your coffee instead of checking email. It doesn't matter what it is. It matters that you choose it, and that you do it first. This sets your direction, because you've led yourself. You've decided. You haven't let the day decide for you. And when you do that one thing first, when you honor that commitment to yourself, you feel different. You feel like you're steering, like you're in control, and that feeling carries into the rest of the day. The morning reset also includes a moment of grounding, a moment where you're not planning or doing, just being. This could be a few deep breaths, a stretch, a moment of stillness before the noise begins. It reminds your nervous system that you're okay, that you're not starting the day in emergency mode, that there's space. And here's what's important: the morning reset is not about perfection. It's not about doing it exactly right. It's about consistency. Some mornings you'll have 20 minutes. Some mornings you'll have 3. Either way, you do something. You reset. You orient. You choose. Because even a 2-minute reset is better than starting the day on autopilot. Over time, this becomes your anchor, the one thing you can count on, the one moment where you led yourself before the world starts pulling at you. And that anchor makes everything else steadier. Chapter 5. One rule that kills procrastination. Procrastination is not laziness. It's not a character flaw. It's a response to discomfort. You procrastinate when a task feels too big, too vague, too uncomfortable, too uncertain. And instead of doing the thing, you do something easier, something that gives you immediate relief from the discomfort. The rule that kills procrastination is this: make the first step so small it's impossible to avoid. Not the whole task, just the first step. And make it so small that you can't justify not doing it. For example, you're procrastinating on writing a report. The thought of writing the whole thing feels overwhelming. So you don't think about writing the whole thing. You think about writing one sentence. Just one. That's the only requirement. And once you write one sentence, the next sentence becomes easier. And the next. And before you know it, You're in it. You're past the resistance. Are you procrastinating on cleaning? The thought of cleaning the entire space feels too much. So you don't clean the entire space. You clean one surface, the kitchen counter. That's it. And once that's clean, momentum carries you. The first step is the hardest, because that's where the resistance lies. That's where the discomfort is highest. But if you make the first step small enough, the resistance can't stop you. You bypass it. You start before your mind has time to talk you out of it. This works because action creates clarity. When you're stuck in your head, thinking about the task, it feels worse than it is. It feels bigger, more overwhelming. But when you start, when you take the first small step, the task becomes real, concrete, and usually it's not as bad as you thought. The key is to define the first step clearly, not work on the project. That's too vague. Open the document and write one sentence. That's clear. That's doable. Not get in shape. That's overwhelming. Put on your shoes and walk for 5 minutes. That's small. That's something you can do right now. Another part of this rule: you don't have to finish. You just have to start. You don't have to write the whole report. You just have to write one sentence. And if you stop after one sentence, that's fine. You've broken the procrastination. Usually, you won't stop. Usually, starting is enough to carry you through. But even if you do stop, you've still won. Because you've proven to yourself that you can start. Procrastination dies when you stop thinking about the whole thing and just do the first small thing. Every time. So the next time you're procrastinating, ask yourself, what's the smallest possible first step? And then do it. Without thinking. Without negotiating. Just do it. And watch the resistance dissolve. Chapter 6. Emotional control before time control. You can have the perfect schedule, the perfect plan, the perfect time management system, and it won't matter if your emotions are running you. Because when you're anxious, you can't focus. When you're overwhelmed, you can't prioritize. When you're frustrated, you make impulsive decisions. When you're numb, you avoid everything. Most productivity advice skips this part. It goes straight to time management, to calendars and to-do lists and blocking off hours. But time management is useless if you can't regulate yourself emotionally, because your emotions determine whether you follow through. So before you try to control your time, you have to learn to control your state. Not suppress it, not ignore it. Control it. That means noticing when you're activated, when you're in fight or flight, when your nervous system is running the show instead of your conscious mind, and then regulating, bringing yourself back to baseline, so you can think clearly, so you can act intentionally instead of creatively. Here's how you do that. When you notice you're emotionally activated, when you're anxious, frustrated, overwhelmed, you pause. You don't push through. You don't try to force yourself to be productive while you're dysregulated. You pause and you regulate. You take 3 deep breaths. You step outside for a minute. You move your body. You do something physical that brings you back into your body and out of your head. This might feel like you're wasting time, like you should just push through and get the work done. But you're not wasting time. You're investing it, because 5 minutes of regulation will save you an hour of unproductive spinning. When you're regulated, you work faster. You think clearer. You make better decisions. You actually follow through. Emotional control also means recognizing your patterns. When do you tend to get overwhelmed? When do you shut down? When do you spiral? If you know your patterns, you can prepare. You can build in regulation before you get activated. You can design your day so you're not constantly pushing yourself into dysregulation. For example, if you know you get anxious in the afternoons, you don't schedule your hardest work then. You schedule it in the morning when you're steadier. And in the afternoon, you do easier tasks. Or you take a break. Or you move. You're designing around your emotional reality, not pretending it doesn't exist. Another piece of emotional control: knowing the difference between productive discomfort and destructive stress. Productive discomfort is when you're stretching, growing, doing something hard but meaningful. You might feel resistance, but it's not damaging. It's just challenge. Destructive stress is when you're pushing past your limits, ignoring your needs, operating in constant depletion. That's not growth, that's harm. And you have to learn to tell the difference. Because one builds you, the other breaks you. So before you optimize your schedule, optimize your state. Learn to regulate. Learn to recognize when you're activated. Learn to bring yourself back to baseline. Because emotional control is the foundation, and everything else is built on top of it. Chapter 7. The 10-minute focus sprint. Focus is not about hours, it's about intensity. You don't need to work for 4 hours straight. You need to work with full attention for short bursts, and then rest, and then go again. This is the 10-minute focus sprint. Here's how it works. You set a timer for 10 minutes. And for those 10 minutes, you do one thing. Just one, with full focus. No phone, no notifications, no tabs open, no distractions. Just you and the task. And when the timer goes off, you stop, you take a break. You move, you breathe, you reset, and then if you want, you go again. 10 minutes is short enough that your brain doesn't resist. It's not overwhelming. It's not a huge commitment. It's just 10 minutes, but it's long enough to make real progress, to get into the work, to produce something meaningful. Most people try to work for hours, and they end up half-foused for most of it. Distracted, checking their phone, drifting in and out of attention. But 10 minutes of full focus is more valuable than an hour of half-fouse, because you're actually doing the work, not just sitting with it. The 10-minute sprint also builds your focus muscle. Every time you complete a sprint, you're training your brain to sustain attention, to resist distraction, to stay with one thing. And over time, 10 minutes becomes easier. And you can extend it to 15, to 20, to 30. But you start with 10, because 10 is doable. The break after the sprint is just as important as the sprint itself. Because your brain needs recovery. It needs space. It can't sustain high focus indefinitely. So after 10 minutes, you stand up. You stretch. You look away from the screen. You let your mind wander for a moment. And then, when you're ready, you sprint again. This method also prevents burnout, because you're not grinding for hours. You're working in bursts, with rest built in, with space built in. You're honoring the natural rhythm of focus and rest. And that rhythm is sustainable. So the next time you sit down to work, don't think about working for hours. Think about working for 10 minutes. Set the timer, choose one task, focus fully, and when the timer goes off, stop. You'll be surprised how much you can get done, how much clearer you feel, how much easier it is to sustain. 10 minutes. That's all you need, and then another 10, and another. until the work is done. Chapter 8. Build tiny promises you always keep. Self-trust is built through small promises, not big ones. Small ones. When you make a commitment to yourself and you keep it, you're building evidence that you're reliable, that you follow through, that you can count on yourself. And over time, that evidence accumulates, and you start to trust yourself more. And when you trust yourself, discipline becomes easier. But most people make promises that are too big. They promise they'll work out every day. They'll wake up at 5. They'll never eat sugar again. And then they break those promises because they're too big, too rigid, too disconnected from reality. And every time you break a promise to yourself, you erode trust. You prove to yourself that you can't rely on you. And that makes the next promise harder to keep. So instead of big promises, make tiny ones. Promises so small that you can't not keep them. I'll drink 1 glass of water when I wake up. I'll write 1 sentence. I'll stretch for 2 minutes. These are tiny, almost laughably small. But that's the point. Because when you keep a tiny promise, you build trust. You prove to yourself that you're someone who follows through. And that proof compounds. You keep 1 tiny promise, and then another and another. And over time, those tiny promises become habits. And those habits become who you are. The key is consistency. It's better to do something tiny every day than something big once a week. Tiny and consistent builds trust. Big and sporadic doesn't. So you start small. Smaller than feels significant. And you do it every day. No exceptions. And you watch how your relationship with yourself changes. Another part of this, you don't scale up too fast. You keep the promise tiny until it's automatic. Until you don't even think about it. And only then do you add more. Most people try to scale up immediately. They do the tiny thing for 3 days and then think, okay, now I'll do the big thing. And they break the promise. And they lose the trust. But if you stay with the tiny promise for weeks, for months, it becomes unbreakable. It becomes part of your identity. And then you can add more. Because the foundation is solid. This is how you build self-control, not through force, not through willpower, but through tiny, consistent promises that prove to yourself that you're reliable. And when you know you're reliable, when you trust yourself, everything else becomes easier. Chapter 9. How calm people stay consistent. Calm people are not calm by accident. They're calm because they have systems. They don't rely on motivation. They don't rely on feeling good. They don't rely on perfect circumstances. They rely on systems, on routines, on structures that hold them even when they don't feel like holding themselves. A system is just a repeatable process, something you do the same way every time. So you don't have to decide. You just follow the system. For example, a morning routine is a system. You do the same things in the same order every morning. You don't have to think. You just do. A work system is the same. You sit down. You open your task list. You do the first thing. No decision, no negotiation, just action. Systems remove the emotional component. You don't have to feel motivated. You don't have to feel inspired. You just follow the system, and that's how calm people stay consistent. They've built systems that carry them through the days when they don't want to, through the days when motivation is low, through the days when everything feels hard. Calm people also understand that consistency doesn't mean perfection. It means showing up, even imperfectly. They don't skip the entire workout because they only have 10 minutes instead of an hour. They do 10 minutes. They don't avoid writing because they can't write 1,000 words. They write 100. They don't wait for the perfect conditions. They work with the conditions they have. Another quality of calm people, they know their limits. They don't overcommit. They don't try to do everything. They choose a few things that matter, and they protect those things. They say no to the rest. And because they're not overextended, they can stay consistent. They're not constantly burning out and starting over. They're just steady. Calm people also build in recovery. They know that consistency requires rest, that you can't just go without stopping. So they rest intentionally, without guilt, and that rest allows them to show up again and again. If you want to stay consistent, you have to build like calm people build, not through force, not through endless motivation, but through systems, through routines, through structures that hold you, and through the wisdom to know your limits, to protect your energy, to rest when you need to. Consistency is not about intensity, it's about sustainability. And sustainability comes from design, from systems, from calm. Chapter 10. Remove friction, not willpower. Willpower is a limited resource. You only have so much of it in a day. And every decision, every moment of resistance, every time you have to force yourself, it depletes. So if your entire life is designed to require willpower, you're going to run out. And when you run out, you collapse. The solution is not to build more willpower. It's to remove friction, to design your life so the things you want to do require less effort, and the things you don't want to do require more. Friction is anything that makes an action harder. Distance, steps, decisions, barriers. If your gym clothes are in the bottom of a drawer, that's friction. You have to dig them out. That small effort might be enough to make you skip the workout. But if your gym clothes are laid out the night before, right next to your bed, there's no friction. You just put them on. If your phone is next to you while you work, that's low friction for distraction. One glance, one tap, and you're off task. But if your phone is in another room, that's high friction. You'd have to stand up, walk over, unlock it. That's enough to make you pause. And in that pause, you might choose not to. Remove friction from the things that matter. Add friction to the things that don't. If you want to read more, put a book on your pillow, right where you'll see it when you get into bed. Low friction. If you want to stop scrolling before bed, put your phone in another room. High friction. This is not about willpower. It's about design. You're not trying to be stronger. You're making the environment do the work for you. And that's sustainable. Because you're not depleting yourself every day. You're just following the path of least resistance. And you've designed that path to lead where you want to go. Another way to remove friction: preparation. When you prepare in advance, you remove the decisions and the effort from the moment. If you prep your meals on Sunday, you don't have to decide what to eat during the week. You don't have to cook when you're tired. You just eat what's ready. If you plan your work the night before, you don't have to figure out what to do when you sit down. You just start. Preparation removes friction, and friction removal makes follow-through easier. You can also remove mental friction by simplifying, by reducing options, by making fewer decisions. If you wear the same thing every day, you don't waste mental energy on what to wear. If you eat the same breakfast you don't decide every morning. This might sound boring, but it's liberating. Because you're not spending energy on things that don't matter. You're saving it for things that do. So look at your life. Where is there unnecessary friction around the things you want to do? Where is there low friction around the things you don't? And adjust, design. Remove the barriers, add them where needed, and watch how much easier it becomes to follow through. Not because you're stronger, but because you're smarter. Chapter 11. Your no muscle. Most people think self-control is about saying yes. Yes to discipline, yes to hard work, yes to showing up. But self-control is also about saying no. And for many people, saying no is harder. Saying no to distractions, no to requests that don't serve you, no to obligations you don't actually want, no to the easy thing when you know you need to do the hard thing. This is your no muscle. And like any muscle, it gets stronger with use. The problem is most people don't practice saying no. They say yes to everything because saying yes feels easier. It avoids conflict. It keeps people happy. It feels productive. But every yes to something that doesn't matter is a no to something that does. When you say yes to scrolling, you're saying no to rest. When you say yes to a meeting you don't need, you're saying no to focused work. When you say yes to other people's priorities, you're saying no to your own. Your no muscle gets built by practicing, by saying no to small things, and building up to bigger ones. Start with easy no's. No to the second helping when you're already full. No to checking your phone first thing in the morning. No to one unnecessary task. Those are small, but they train the muscle. And then you move to harder no's. No to invitations you don't want. No to projects that don't align. No to people who drain you, not out of cruelty, out of clarity, out of knowing what matters and protecting it. Saying no also requires you to tolerate discomfort. Because people won't always like your no. They might push back. They might be disappointed. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with someone being unhappy with your boundary. Because if you can't tolerate that discomfort, you'll keep saying yes when you mean no. And you'll keep depleting yourself. Your no muscle is also about internal boundaries. Saying no to your own impulses. No to the urge to quit when things get hard. No to the desire to avoid. No to the reflex to distract. This is harder than external no's, because you're the only one holding the boundary, and it's easy to let yourself off the hook. But this is where real self-control is built, in the internal no's, in the moments where you don't give in to yourself. The more you practice, the stronger the muscle gets, and eventually saying no doesn't feel hard. It just feels like clarity. You know what you're protecting. You know what you're choosing. And the no is just the expression of that choice. So start practicing. Start small. Say no to one thing today, and tomorrow. Say no to another. Build the muscle. And watch how your life starts to align with what actually matters. Chapter 12. Becoming someone you can rely on. This is the shift that changes everything. When you become someone you can rely on, when you trust yourself to follow through, to show up, to do what you said you would do, everything becomes easier. Not because life gets easier, but because you're steadier. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop negotiating with yourself every time something is hard. You just do it because you know you will, because you've proven it over and over. And that proof creates confidence. Not the loud, performative kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Becoming someone you can rely on is not about never failing. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent, about showing up, about keeping the tiny promises, about leading yourself even when no one is watching. It's about waking up and doing the morning reset, even when you don't feel like it. About taking the 10-minute focus sprint, even when you're tired. About saying no when you need to, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about building systems, about removing friction, about regulating your emotions, about starting small and staying consistent. And over time, these practices become who you are, not things you do, who you are. You're not someone who tries to be disciplined. You're someone who is, not perfectly, but consistently. You're not someone who hopes to lead themselves. You're someone who does. And that identity, that sense of self as someone who follows throughout, changes how you move through the world. You stop feeling out of control. You stop feeling like life is happening to you. You start feeling like you're steering. People will notice, not because you're louder, but because you're steadier, because you show up, because you do what you say, because there's a quiet reliability to you, and they'll lean on that. They'll trust you, because you've learned to trust yourself first. This is the entire point, not to become some idealized version of yourself, not to be perfect, not to never struggle, but to become someone you can rely on. Someone who leads themselves, who builds self-control and inner stability, who keeps going even when it's hard. And that person is not far away. That person is who you become through the small, daily choices, through the tiny promises, through the systems, through the practice. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Until one day, you realize you've become the person you needed all along. Closing. No one is coming to manage your life. No one is coming to motivate you, to push you, to make sure you follow through. That's your job, and it's always been your job. But now you know how. You know that discipline is not force. It's design. You know how to stop fighting yourself, how to start your day with intention, how to kill procrastination with one tiny step. You know that emotional control comes before time control, that 10 minutes of focus is enough, that tiny promises build self-trust. You know how calm people stay consistent, how to remove friction instead of relying on willpower, how to strengthen your no muscle. And you know that the goal is not perfection. It's becoming someone you can rely on. This is not a one-time transformation. This is a practice, a daily practice, a way of being with yourself that compounds over time. Some days will be easy. Some will be hard. Some days you'll follow through perfectly. Some days you won't, and that's okay. Because you're not aiming for perfect. You're aiming for consistent, for steady, for reliable. And every time you lead yourself, every time you make the choice, every time you keep the tiny promise you're building self-control, building inner stability, building trust. The moment you led yourself, everything changes, not all at once, but slowly, steadily, until one day you look around and realize you're not the same person you were. You're calmer, steadier, more grounded. You're someone who follows through, someone who shows up, someone you can rely on. And that person is powerful, not because they're perfect, but because they're consistent, not because they never struggle, but because they keep going anyway. Lead yourself first, every day. in small ways and watch how everything else falls into place. Thank you for being here. End of audiobook.